in this church is the place where Adam was buried, according to the Christian tradition, non-Protestant Christian tradition, and the place where Christ was crucified. Christ was crucified above the head of Adam. And it's a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. And the blood trickles down. When Longinus stabs him in the side, blood and water pours forth, trickles down, baptizes Adam, and he is liberated from the stone. And in a parallel story, Christ, after he dies, harrows hell, goes down into the underworld, frees Adam and Eve and all the good guys, and then he is resurrected from his tomb 3 days later. The stone is rolled away, the tomb is emptied, and then shortly thereafter he transcends and achieves atonement with the divine, much like Hercules. So like Hercules, he freed the progenitor, the first, and like Hercules, he is the one that achieves atonement. And that is the end of the story of Adam and Eve and Christ. Do you have any questions about this epic narrative extending between Adam and Christ? And in the end, I will make a couple comments about an Islamic resonance with my final thesis.
Because I'm not that familiar with all the aspects of the Christ myth. So when Christ dies, there is part of the story that says that he baptized Adam?
Not only is it part of the story.
I mean, is it in
That's not in the Bible.
Not only, okay, it's in many, many, many folk stories, but here's the key. All the old Christian traditions share a church where it's literally a part of the architecture that they all acknowledge that this happened. Because there is a place in the stone, a crack in the stone in this church that all the Christian traditions besides the Protestants share. And they all come and they all visit and they all look at it and they all point. And there's this crack. And it said this is where the blood trickled down and freed Adam.
Yeah,
We saw that. Yeah.
but no,
Crucial.
it's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible.
Oh, it's not in the Bible.
But it's in many folkloric versions. Many of them. Cave of Treasures, first book of Adam and Eve, the Georgian book of Adam, and others. And later it became picked up and crucial to European traditions would retell that story too. Thanks for asking that question.
In this tradition, Adam and Eve, their story was for sure finalized, or not finalized, but told in full long before the telling of Christ and the freeing of Adam, right? So he was left dead in the story for presumably hundreds of years before later Christ would come along and Christianity free him.
Correct. Yet, there are versions of the story, the old Christian versions of the story, when they retell the story of Adam, they interweave all the prophecies that Christ is going to come and free them. So in the Christian retellings, they go back into the story of Adam and build in the prophecy. So
in the Christian retellings, again, it would be like Prometheus and such that, Adam was died and then pretty quickly in the story resurrected.
Well, narratively, it's much later, of course. It's like the first human and then like the current 2,000 years ago.
Like you just said, they go back into the Christian story and
Right.
build in the prophecy.
Right.
As opposed to they go back into the Christian stories and acknowledge the prophecies.
Well,
they build it like they
add them.
reinserted it
They
later.
do. So there are of course many prophecies of Christ that are already there, that are different than these particular prophecies. But the prophecy directly of Adam being redeemed by Christ, or by God, those are hugely. They go back into those traditions and rewrite that story. But I should pull out the pages. But there's also a Jewish story that these cave of treasures, these particular stories of Adam and Eve. There's a Jewish story, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but that's older, that many believe inspired these, and that has some hints of some similar idea of redemption of these. But you also have the story that in another Jewish story, you have a seed is planted in Adam's mouth, and then a tree grows from the mouth, and that almost in a way fills the cross side, the second half of the story, the rebirth.
But really seminal to Christianity is the idea of the redemption, because according to the Judaic tradition and the Old Testament, Adam and Eve are never redeemed. There's never forgiveness. Am I right about that?
No, they are. That's what the harrowing of hell is all about. and in the standardized Christian tradition, and this one's in the Bible, during the 3 days, Christ goes down and saves all these
But they weren't
people.
saved before Christ. That's
That's
thing.
right. That's right.
Until Christ,
They lay in wait until Christ sets them free, and so this is this great epic.
which was the fundamental change of Christianity.
And Adam represents
the
all of
forgiveness.
humanity.
Ultimately, the forgiveness of original sin, which
Mhm.
was Adam's original sin.
Exactly.
So,
And
But did
Eve
you
is
say-
inverted too. So Eve is the sinning one, and of course Mary is the sinless.
But did you say that the whole story tradition of Adam and Eve followed Christ by several hundred years?
he
No,
did.
there's
He did.
the Christian
No.
story. In about 400 AD, Christians went back and rewrote the story of Adam and Eve to include Christ as an eventual.
From
Not making
Genesis or
major
or
changes.
later,
No,
and
a
later
different, and completely
interpretation?
new story. It's called the Cave of Treasures, the Georgian Book of Adam and Eve. These are different texts.
But it would have been pretty similar to the original stories, yeah? Plus some
Yeah.
prophecies about
Yeah,
Christ.
plus
It's
plus
the
some build out.
redemption part.
Well, and some build out and some color and
So you,
Yeah.
you have the story that you told of Hercules and
mhm.
so on, and the saving there, and this story, and then you told different versions of the Christian sort of
Mhm.
different myths. Why is it then that of all those stories, it's the Christian myth, as you choose to call it, that is the one that takes hold and nations were built on?
Well, what I'm looking at is the three stories I've focused on are the three that have done that, right? The classical tradition, the Abrahamic, because Islam also did that in other territories, and the scientific tradition, because those have really exploded in that way. And the big question of why they do that is a myth question, and I think there are many answers. One of the biggest is need. I think the stories fulfill a role, an existential role, and so but there's much more to that. I think there's two sides of that. There's the uptake and there's the forcing. I want to ask Zaman if he has any thoughts, and then we'll take a break here in just a minute.
Which aspect of it?
Any, because I know I'm talking about Eden, and I want to make sure I
In
ask you.
response to the last question, I would say that the Jewish in the Jewish tradition, both God and Adam and Eve were more perceived in the tribal context, whereas Christianity gave it a more universal
Right.
setting, and this universal setting would have required for not only God to be elevated, but Adam and Eve along with it, in that sense. So, which is in a way became the fiber of at the social level, regardless of religion, and many Muslims also unknowingly tap onto the Christian version, whereas the Quran speaks something totally different. And in respect to the Iblis that I think you showed interest in earlier, that Iblis is let's put it, the character in the drama, in the story of creation, where Iblis and God acts upon Adam. And in the story of the Garden of Eden, it is a different story, where Adam acts upon God, and now the next character, the name changes to Shaitan, which is Satan. So Satan is in the Garden of Eden and afterwards, which is a propensity within the human itself, whereas Iblis would be outside of the human. So I think these two would have to be separated. Also, in terms of the role of Adam, Adam is androgynous. It represents both Adam, the male and the female, together. And because of that nature, when they eat of the quote-unquote forbidden fruit, and God asked them, they responded saying that we did it unto ourselves. And unto ourselves is used in the dual, not in the plural, not in the singular, but in the dual. In other words, the responsibility is shared from the start. So there is no blaming of Eve and the serpent, and none of that is there. So I think those would be probably the major differences.
Thanks for helping me with those. Well, let's take a 10-minute break, and let's come back at 7 o'clock, and then we'll do the rest.